Hello, everyone. I'm Brooks Rayford, president of the North Carolina Technology Association, or NC Tech, and I would like to welcome you to today's NC Tech Talk. Thanks to our partnership with Cisco and their WebEx platform, we are recording today's conversation and we'll send you a link to it in our follow-up. NC Tech has been incorporating virtual sessions as part of our overall programming, including this NC Tech Talk series, where we engage with key leaders from across North Carolina to talk about what's on their mind and how their organization is adapting to today's environment. Over the past few years, North Carolina has become a hotbed for tech startups, many of which have seen tremendous growth and success. And one of those success stories has been ChannelAdvisor, based in Raleigh. We're excited to have their CEO, David Spitz, here with us today to share their story and talk a bit about how they are managing through this new normal. Our format today will start with some welcoming remarks from our sponsor, and then I'll take it from there and ask David some prepared questions. We invite all of you to use the Q&A function to submit additional questions for David, and I'll do my best to filter those and pose them through today's dialogue. Know that there is a separate chat function. Please use that only if you have technical problems or questions, and my fellow staff members will respond to those. I'll just be looking at Q&A to pull questions. We also ask that everyone mute your audio unless you're speaking, and we encourage you to select the speaker view option so that you'll see a fuller screen of whoever is speaking. To kick things off, I'd like to thank the sponsor for today's session, IDA Ireland, and invite their Vice President of Technology, Consumer and Business Services, Emma Mitchell, to say a few words of welcome. Emma?
Great. Thank you, Brooks. I'd just like to say good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to the folks Tech for asking us to participate in this webinar today. We're really grateful of our ongoing partnership between organizations and hope to join you in the future for many more of these events. So I'll give a brief introduction to IDA Ireland before I pass back to you, Brooks. IDA Ireland is the economic development agency for the Irish government, focusing on foreign direct investment. Our role is to work with companies that are considering Ireland as a strategic investment location, while also supporting the approximately 1,550 multinational companies that have operations there. We support companies in several different ways. These supports range from introductions to peer companies, tailored site visits, albeit virtually at the moment, help accessing the government system, information gathering, analysis and evaluation. And then once a company has chosen Ireland as their location, we assist further with employment visas and supports, property solutions, and access to IDA funding and incentives. IDA Ireland has 7 US offices. I'm normally working out of our Atlanta office with responsibility for the technology content and business portfolio, as Brooke said. And my colleague Sean McWilliams is also on the line. He is based out of our Austin office with responsibility for the early stage high growth companies. A number of NC Tech Association member companies have operations in Ireland. These include SAS, Red Hat, SentryOne, and of course ChannelAdvisor, who are speaking today. There are a number of reasons, I suppose, why US companies have chosen Ireland for the European base. And if anything, I would say these have been validated even further in recent turbulent months. As a well-educated, flexible workforce, a recent April OECD report ranked Ireland second in the world for flexibility and adaptability of people when faced with challenges. Ireland has one of the highest remote working populations in the EU. I think our average is 7% versus it is 7% versus the EU average of 5%. We are a committed member of the European Union, and post-Brexit will be the only English-speaking country in the Eurozone. And there's a number of supports from the government, particularly during this crisis. But look, I'm quite conscious that a number of the members of this association currently will be focusing on maintaining what current operations they have. And this is not a sales pitch, but I just want to say on that note, I'm delighted to hand back to David and Brooks. ChannelAdvisor are a great reference company for us from the NC Tech portfolio. They're based out in Limerick, our third largest city, and have had an operation there for over 10 years. So back to you now, Brooks.
Great, thank you very much, Emma, and thank you for IDA Ireland's membership and support of NC Tech over the years. We appreciate that. Again, I'm very pleased today to have as our featured guest David Spitz, CEO of ChannelAdvisor. As an e-commerce company that provides cloud-based e-commerce software, they have seen tremendous growth in the past few years. In fact, from 2010 to 2019, the company's revenue has more than tripled, and they've processed more than 10 billion in gross merchandise value. David is responsible for leading the company in its mission to provide retailers and branded manufacturers with the software and services needed to successfully sell their products via online sales channels. Before joining ChannelAdvisor in 2006, David founded and successfully exited multiple venture-backed software companies. He was most recently an entrepreneur in residence at the Aurora Funds, a venture capital firm with more than 200 million under management. He has also been awarded 4 U.S. patents. David received his Bachelor of Computer Science from the University of California, San Diego. He has been chairman of the board for the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics Foundation, as well as for the North Carolina Council for Entrepreneurial Development. David, thank you for making the time to be with us today, and welcome to NC Tech.
Thank you, Brooks. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Your home office is probably not as modern looking as your office, I'm guessing. I like that.
I'm old school.
Yeah, me too. So we're broadcasting this session on live on July 14th, and we'll share this recording in our video library for future viewing. Future viewing. And so I wanted to start right out of the gate with a question about our rapidly changing world. Between COVID-19 and the social unrest that's unfolding in our country, talk a little bit about how ChannelAdvisor is adjusting to all the change and shifting your priorities as needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to be here today. You know, the first thing I think it's important to acknowledge that this last few months really have been a whirlwind. I'm sure most of us in some ways feel like time has moved really slowly, but on the other hand, it's hard to imagine that it was just 4 or 5 months ago, you know, before all of this really kind of took over. And so, you know, it's been quite, I think, a different environment for many of us and many businesses. And the thing I'd like to say off the top is a thank you to healthcare workers and other people who are on the front lines of this. There's a lot of tough economic issues out there, a lot of tough social issues out there, a lot of pain being felt, and it's a little bit humbling against that backdrop to be talking about, you know, ourselves and our business, but here we are. You know, as it relates to the pandemic, we moved fairly early and fairly quickly. I think it was the first week in March that we began the process of moving to a remote workforce, and we are around 700 people around the world, and we have offices in a number of different countries. We activated, actually towards the end of February, we activated our business continuity program, which was essentially really a program designed, you know, we're a software technology company, so it was really designed to help keep us operating in the face of a major event. So, you know, system outages, that kind of stuff. I can't say that we, you know, thought that the pandemic was really something to expect, but a well-designed business continuity program, you know, is adaptable and flexible. So we shut down our offices globally at the beginning of March, sending, you know, close to 700 people to work from home. I think it was about 48 hours from start to finish. And I'll tell you, it's gone phenomenally well, better than I expected. We've surveyed our employees a couple of times in that time period, and 92% of our employees say that they feel as or more productive than before. Our back office was really already in the cloud, so we use, you know, NetSuite, for example, as our GL, and Salesforce, and a variety of other applications in the cloud. We had implemented a video conferencing system back in January, and so we really haven't skipped a beat. But I would also tell you that as much as I think we were sort of ahead of the curve in going to a remote work situation, I think we're going to be behind the curve going back. What we're doing now seems to be working really well. Employees, you know, feel like they have what they need, and there's a lot of complexity in getting people back into an office environment. And so I'm just not sure that, for us anyway, that I see the point in rushing back. We've already told our U.S. team it's possible that we'll be working from home through the end of the year, just based on the current conditions that we're seeing. So we've had some really good contributions from our business continuity team and employees who've been leading that. And I've worked with some of the local CEOs as well, and sort of traded notes about how they're handling things, and that's been great in terms of the local environment. I want to touch on the social unrest piece too, because I think managing through the pandemic in some ways, has, like I said, has gone pretty smoothly. The social unrest and Black Lives Matter movement is really an issue that's caused me, and I would say us as a company, some soul searching. We've always been I think a welcoming and inclusive and merit-based environment, and so I always felt good about how we how we operated. But the epiphany for me really was realizing that that's actually not enough. We have to do more, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because a just society actually is a thriving society. So for us, we didn't rush to social media. You won't see a lot of posts about these issues yet from us. And I know some companies did, and I think that's great if it works for you. But I realized there was a lot I didn't know. And so we actually started with some listening sessions. We did 7 hour-long sessions, and I'll tell you, they were really powerful and in some cases emotional. We heard from a lot of our colleagues, Black, Muslim, LGBTQ, a lot of other team members, and had some great discussions around topics that for most of us are normally taboo at the office. And it really personalized the struggles that a lot of people go through. That someone like me, who's a middle-aged white male, can't even imagine. And I'll tell you, Brooks, when I saw the video of George Floyd, and he's calling for his mother as the life slips out of him, I just thought, what if that were my dad or my kid? And I believe that the vast majority of our law enforcement are great people who just want to get home safely, like the rest of us. And I have friends in law enforcement and employees whose family members are police officers. I know it's been hard for them too. But I believe that to be Black or brown or Muslim or gay is a different experience where people are confronted with some troubling things every day. And some of those issues may be intentional, some may be unintentional, but you get followed around a store, you can't rent an Airbnb because of your name. We had 2 employees who were married to each other, who are interracial marriage, and just hearing their different experiences, driving a car as an example. Just really opened up some stuff, and these issues, they bring people down, and it adds up, and it hurts human potential, which I think hurts all of us. So it crystallized for me that it wasn't just about being a great place to work. Our role is to push for more change and be part of the solution. And we're doing a lot of things. We set up an internal task force. We've hired a D&I consultant. We're moving to a blind resume process so that we strip out some internal bias. We're going to start recruiting from historically Black colleges. We've made Election Day in the U.S. A holiday to improve access to voting. We're focused on diversity and pay equity, which as a public company I think is really important, and there's more to do. And I dream of a day where everyone is treated equally, and in the Supreme Court building it says equal justice under the law. I don't think we're quite there yet, but we're committed to doing our part.
Well, that's a great and eloquent answer and set of observations. Thank you for sharing that with us. And hosted our first ever Diversity and Inclusion in Tech Summit. It was originally going to be in person in March. Clearly that didn't happen, so we moved it to June and then went virtual. And actually we have 3 times the number of registrants than we would have had or anticipated having when it would have been an in-person conference. And the lineup was terrific, and it emphasized that diversity and inclusion is a broad term. It's not just the 2 or 3 things that come right to mind for most of us, things that are visible, that are obvious. And so the array of panelists and speakers that we had really was quite broad, and lots of interesting insights. I don't care how well versed a person might think they are on that topic. There was a lot to be learned. And so when we follow up with this session today, I'll include a link to that on our website. All of it was recorded and is available, and I think it's really worth taking a listen. And so thank you for coming to that. I want to pivot a little bit here. Speaking of pivoting, a lot of companies and organizations have had to. You mentioned yourself going to a remote workforce or work at home environment fairly quickly. You had a business continuity plan that was at least a basis for what you did. But as you look back, just briefly, what would be one thing you can think of that was a particular that maybe went better than you thought it might or than it could have? And then one thing that maybe hasn't gone as well, still been a challenge for you?
Yeah. Well, I think from a success standpoint, standing up our business continuity team and shifting, virtually overnight to a global remote workforce and have that go really well has been a great success. And I give a lot of kudos to our business continuity team, who's headed up by Beth Segovia, our chief operating officer, and Ali Zelmat, who's our director of global support. They and the people that have been on that task force have performed like heroes, and it's just gone really well. I think when I think about challenges, it's less operational for us. It's really been more about trying to figure out how all of this plays out, right? So in the middle, we talk about this being a whirlwind. The analogy I've used is, if the financial crisis was like a hurricane, this kind of big, slow-moving thing that just caused a lot of damage, this almost feels like a tornado. It like kind of came in relatively quickly. It destroyed the building across the street, but this building is doing fine, and hopefully it'll exit faster than the financial crisis. We'll see. But back in mid-March, it really wasn't clear, right? It felt to me anyway like it was 2008 all over again. Sort of felt like I was standing on the edge of the cliff looking over, couldn't quite see bottom, didn't know what to expect. And then for us, as April progressed, we started to see e-commerce volumes really increase pretty substantially. Normally our busiest time in e-commerce is in the sort of holiday Q4 Christmas season when people are buying gifts and whatnot. And so we really saw that pull forward in April. And I think as we've seen states reopen and then backtrack, it's like, look at California yesterday, just announced they're kind of, moving back to more of a shutdown kind of mode. It's been the most rapidly changing set of circumstances I've seen in my career, right? I mean, and this is global, right? We're talking about the US here, but everything I've just described is almost a global phenomenon. And as I think about the back half of 2020, there's just so many uncertainties, right? Will there be more stimulus funding? And if so, what form is it going to take? What's it going to look like? We saw a spike in transaction volumes on April 15th, a couple months ago when the first batch of stimulus came. And I don't know what the next batch might look like. Is the pandemic going to get worse? Right now, it's not looking great. Will it start to subside? Will there be subsequent waves? You got an election in the middle of all that. So I would say, it's never easy kind of thinking about what does the next few months or next few quarters or next couple of years look like when you're running a business. But man, visibility is limited these days, I would say, for probably most businesses.
Well, you touched on the demand of e-commerce in this period, April 15th as an example, in general, with people being at home more. So you work with companies large and small across the globe, and you have your own business development needs. So in addition to just greater demand on e-commerce generally, talk a bit about the challenges of growing your business within the COVID environment where travel really isn't happening, and you've got sites around the world, as we noted earlier in the introduction.
Yeah. So, to a certain extent, this environment has stimulated demand in e-commerce, right? I think you can see a lot of headlines on that. And the reality is that digital, everybody's had to take that 5-year digital plan and get it done in 5 months, right? So if you're a brand who's been kind of on a digital journey, but maybe 90% of your revenue was still through the retail channel, well, all of a sudden in the spring, when all those retailers shut down, your board of directors was saying to you, hey, that 5-year plan, we better quicken the pace. So that's, I think, a net positive for us. And of course, what's new is, to your point, we can't travel and visit customers or prospects, and doing everything virtually has been a bit of a learning experience. We've been doing an annual conference for years, many years, which has always been hugely popular, and we're doing it virtually this year. And we'll see how that goes. Another example is we used to do these dinners with prospects and customers at a nice restaurant in New York or San Francisco or Chicago, what have you. Obviously can't do that anymore. So we just hosted a couple weeks ago and are doing another one next week, a virtual wine tasting, which I wasn't sure what to expect, but I had a friend who was a sommelier and who kind of participated and kicked it off, and we tried to emulate the intimacy of and networking that you get with a dinner. And the first one we did, I have to say, I was positively surprised. It was a lot of fun, very successful. We've got another one next week. But do I miss those in-person interactions? You bet. But you can complain about it or adapt, and so we're doing our best to adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of companies and organizations within our membership, and they cover the gamut in terms of size and even type. One of the subsets of members we have are companies who are not headquartered in North Carolina, but have a large tech hub here. So the obvious examples would be IBM and Cisco and some of the others, but also MetLife, Fidelity, Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank, other companies that have large tech sites here. Yep. Even though the company isn't headquartered here. And there are a couple of dozen of the site leaders or the lead executive for those companies in North Carolina that I convene from time to time. And we would normally do a dinner somewhere or some sort of in-person gathering where they can really come to know each other as peers. It's a very unique role. And so they don't really run into many people who do what they do in that kind of company. And so we've had a couple of virtual meetings, and interestingly, the ability to see themselves on screen at once and really have conversation that way has not been a problem. Rather had a nice steak and a glass of wine, I'm sure, while doing that. But anyway, it was a great dialogue. Back to something you mentioned earlier about your pace of return to office. And I use that term purposefully because people are already working. They're not returning to work. They're returning to office. We asked them, how's that going in big sites like yours, and how are those decisions made, and so on. And to a person, they said the word of the day is no interest in rushing back and then having to adjust again. They also all assume there will be some changes in the structure of their space. You and I've had conversations offline about your own facilities and how they might be best used in a pandemic situation. But when you start to go back and occupy your space, it probably won't be in the same way. You might need as much space for fewer people to spread them out or have flexible arrangements. Yeah. So as you think about your return, what does that look like in your mind for ChannelAdvisor? Yeah,
well, like I said, we're going to be slow in returning to the office. Partly because how we're operating now is working just fine. I mentioned that survey earlier. 85% of our employees would favor continuing to work from home or being able to work from home, with that kind of flexibility. So our employees are telling us, with a few exceptions. I mean, we have some people that, for example, we have an employee who lives in an apartment in London with several roommates, and they don't have a great setup to be able to do that, and we're trying to accommodate people who've got those kinds of situations. But the vast majority of our employees are telling us that they are perfectly happy to continue operating this way as long as they need to. And so, when we do reopen, assuming that treatments and vaccines are not where we need them to be at, the first thing that I've told people is going to be voluntary, right? I'm not going to insist that anybody come in if they're uncomfortable. Maybe they've got an immunocompromised situation that's private to them. Maybe they've got a family member that's at risk who's living with them. And the last thing I'm going to do is insist that somebody come back to the office if they're uncomfortable. And I've seen across my sort of social network, a pretty broad spectrum of people, right? Some people are quite worried, almost terrified of the virus, and some people are more comfortable. And I'm just not going to insist on anybody doing something they're not comfortable with. And we know that we're going to have to wear masks. There's going to be distancing. We probably can't have our sort of coffee station. Cafeteria is going to be closed. There's going to be a lot of cleaning. There's the whole issues around air circulation. And so when I look at all of that, it doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. And I'm not sure how productive that is. And it's expensive and it carries some risk. So we're not in any rush, and we're going to be thoughtful about it, and we'll see. I mean, we obviously, like many businesses, we have a lot of square footage of office space around the world, and it's not an insignificant expense. And we'll see if there's maybe a different way of working for us going forward. That's still something we have to look at.
A couple of more business related questions, but as we broadcast, what the school public school. It's likely to be a hybrid approach where parents will have to manage their students in school in person for a week and then home for 2 weeks and back in for a week and home for 2 weeks. So that just adds a whole nother level of complexity in lives. So the ability to work remotely. Last number of years, including changing the way we on. Share a bit more about how it has become more complex, e-commerce, that is, how ChannelAdvisor is helping companies streamline their processes to be more successful for the online experience.
Yeah, sure. So from a consumer perspective, and I'm sure pretty much everybody on the call shops online at some level, and probably more than they were before all of this. E-commerce just keeps improving if you're a consumer, right? You've already had access to great prices and selection and fast delivery, and now consumers are getting more ways to discover products. So things like Instagram and Pinterest and other social media, and new ways to even get products like curbside pickup. It's been interesting watching the rise of online grocery shopping and grocery delivery and grocery pickup. So all these things that have existed for some time and maybe been a little bit niche have become more mainstream, I think, as a result of the pandemic. And so it's really kind of a golden age of commerce if you're a consumer. But if you're on the supply side of that equation, if you're a seller, that means it's also gotten more and more complex, right? So you have to be really adept and nimble at marketing your products, right? If a consumer can find any product on earth, with a few clicks, how do you rise above the noise, right? So from social networks to search engines and everything in between, you've got to be really good at that, or you're not going to be successful. You have to be really, really good with your product data, right? Data is the sort of currency of e-commerce, right? Because at the end of the day, that's the things that you search for and the attributes and things like that. And you have to be really tight operationally when it comes to fulfillment and shipping, because consumers have really developed a sort of zero tolerance for slow speeds when it comes to getting those products. So what we offer our customers is a single platform to make managing all of that a lot easier, right, and more automated, to ultimately give them a competitive advantage. So that's fundamentally what we do.
Got you. You were once a startup. Now you're a publicly traded company, and you've gone through ups and downs like every company has. It had some exciting growth in turn, some of which you planned for and some of which you did not. With all that in mind, and the fact that you have yourself been an active leader in the states and regions entrepreneurship community, CED being an example of that, talk a little bit about how you are seeing, or what your gut telling you, how startups in this environment can overcome or perhaps go around in some way the even extra obstacles that they're facing. There already are a lot under normal circumstances, but this environment's a new one. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. Entrepreneurship is never easy, even in the best of times. I think any startup has to be aware of their environment and of those externalities, right? You'd be sort of foolish not to. The venture capital industry is itself a bit of a cyclical industry, right? So if you're not aware of, what effects the macro economy has on the various constituents in the startup ecosystem, you may be at a disadvantage. And those externalities, they're real, right? They're there. You can't, the pandemic is here. There's no getting around that. But I also think you have to focus on what you can control as an entrepreneur, right? If you try to focus on all the reasons why things might not work out, it's an almost infinite list as an entrepreneur and kind of overwhelming, right? So, and I think if you look back at history, and I think this is true going, at least in the tech space, if you go back, even into the 70s or the 60s, the best startups in history are born out of really tough economic conditions, right? So while in the moment it feels tough, I think maybe there's something about a tough environment that forces a degree of discipline. But I just know through history, and there's plenty of examples where the best opportunities actually come during times like this. And I think we're also fortunate to live here in North Carolina. I've lived here since just after college, so my whole career, over 25 years. And still, I can tell you without a doubt, and I travel all around the world, there's no other place that I'd rather live in, work in, or start a company. So so I know it can feel difficult in those kinds of environments, and fundraising is probably harder than it was before. But I actually think those rings of the tree, you end up looking back and realizing that those were some of the most formative times. And I think as an investor, this is in entrepreneurial companies, this is really the best time to invest.
Well, that's very optimistic. I want to remind our viewers that we have a little bit of time left. So if you do have a question, pop it in the Q&A segment, and I'll try to work. Forbes magazine recently ranked the top 10 cities in the poised for rebound after COVID. Raleigh and Durham made the list. I know a lot of us think of Raleigh and Durham as really being one area, but from the federal government's perspective, they're two separate metros. So we get counted twice. It's great that both are as strong on their own to make a top 10 list like that. There's one other similar ranking out there. And so when I combine that sort of a recent ranking, and when I look at some of the feedback that we've gotten through an executive poll, we've been doing a tech leadership poll over March, April, and May. I'm sorry, April, May, and June. The 3 months of the virus, essentially. The feedback from there has been that hiring has either been ongoing or stable for the vast majority of the respondents that have responded to us, that there's been increased neutral demand on their business. Very few suggest there's been a notable decrease in demand, and very percentage of our members leadership that we indicated that layoffs and furloughs were part of the practice so far. Most were, again, higher. And we see the last 2 months since digging out in March and April, and bring back as few the really good numbers in June. And we do an IT job trends report every month using a tool from our member company. And we significant declines in North Carolina. June saw a bit of a rebound. So there's an uptick in June. So I hope that those things taken together, clearly the COVID surges also tamper, but I say all that give you an opportunity to give your crystal ball a whirl. What do you see? What does your gut tell you about the general time frame and shape of rebound that we might see in front of us?
Yeah, these days it's a little less of a crystal ball and more of a snow globe that's been shaken, right? So visibility is poor, so frankly, it's a bit of a guess right now to look more than even 2 or 3 months out, I think. And I say some of this, look, I am an optimistic person by nature, as I think you probably picked up on when I was talking about entrepreneurship. But I'll also say that I think, speaking macroeconomically, I do think that things are set up for a tough back half of 2020 and maybe going into 2021. I'm a fairly simple person. I think the reality is that until the pandemic is under control, and so far we seem to be doing our best here in the U.S. to not quite get it under control. Until it's under control, the economy is going to struggle. People aren't going to feel comfortable flying or going on trips or going to hotels and, maybe even going out to eat. And so, it doesn't really matter, if we want them to or don't want them to. If people aren't comfortable, they're just not going to. And, stimulus funds are set to, kind of expire, and we'll see if they get, re-upped and in what form. The airline industry, has kept a lot of people on staff, but of course that expires October 1st. And I have a son who just graduated as a pilot, so timing wasn't great in that regard. So it just feels like there's some negative pressure building up, really driven by the pandemic. Now maybe the Feds pass another round of stimulus and that keeps things going okay, and I think that would be the right move. This is like the worst natural disaster in decades across the country, and Maybe we can agree on some of the basic health things like wearing masks, and once things kind of get under control from a pandemic standpoint, I think the rebound has the potential to be significant. But we've got to get the pandemic controlled. So I think the next 6 months, 8 months maybe are uncertain at best.
Yeah, that tracks with what we have heard in that same polling about tech leaders across North Carolina, that when we first began asking the question around March 31st, April 1st, there was a pretty substantial percentage who felt like there would be measurable improvement in the economy and a beginning of that, the plus side of the U curve or the V curve, as soon as this summer. And that sentiment has certainly shifted as we see the results of that same set of questions. We did it mid-month and end of month, each of those months. The last round, we did the poll on June 30th. And the overwhelming sentiment was, fourth quarter onward before anything of that type would be seen. We had an interesting question, and let me ask you we asked the question: if someone gave you tickets to a large-scale event that you would ordinarily welcome the chance to attend, whether that's a ball game of your favorite team or a concert or a major, business gala or what have you, what's the soonest you would personally feel comfortable going? And we gave them the choice of picking at the time, June, July, August, every month the rest of this year. And then the last two choices were not till 2021 or not till there's a vaccine. And just over half gave one of those last two answers. It was pretty evenly split. And I think a lot of people think those two things will be concurrent, that the vaccine, should there be, will be around late this year, beginning of next, then it's got to be out there and available. So I'm curious, do you own a plane ticket right now?
I do not. And I think my answer is probably fairly consistent with that I don't know that I would wait for a vaccine necessarily. And it's not even about my own health. It's about, I could end up unwittingly carrying something and then transmitting it to somebody who's got underlying risk factors. And so, maybe it's a vaccine, maybe it's, broader herd immunity, maybe, the case counts are elevated, but we find that the treatments are sufficient to keep the mortality level, in check. Maybe there's somewhere in there where I would feel like, okay, that something that I wouldn't do today is something that I would do tomorrow. But I don't see it happening this year, honestly. And and it is I think a little bit interesting, right? If and I'm not saying that this is feasible, because people have to put food on the table, but you could do a thought experiment that says, if we all just stayed home for 3 or 4 weeks and didn't go anywhere and didn't do anything, this thing would run its course, fairly quickly. So, I think it comes down to this trade-off of how abrupt do we want to be versus, do we want to kind of keep going as we are? And only time will tell what the right approach is. But I can't imagine doing something before there's at least a treatment that brings that mortality rate down to a level that's, maybe closer to other kinds of illnesses that we're used to as a society.
Yeah, those thoughts certainly track what we're hearing from others who are leaders in our field and who have roles similar to yours. So, David, really thank you so much for taking the time today. I want to say to everyone who's listened in today that before we adjourn, a quick reminder to check our site for updated and new offerings at nctech.org/events. If you go there, you will find a lineup of over a dozen future NC Tech Talks with various leaders, one of whom, David, and that is Carolyn Saki. She's on our board of directors, and she heads up IPOs for the New York Stock Exchange. And we're interesting to get her take on the tech landscape and what the exchange is seeing. We've got some professional sports team owners. We have the mayors of Raleigh and Charlotte jointly talking about the impact on cities and municipalities of all of this. A lot of interesting people. So take a look. We also have our annual State of Technology Conference coming up. It'll be virtual as well, taking place the mornings of July 23rd and 24th. And you'll find that front and center on our website as well. A great annual gathering, this time virtual. And the theme this year is Data, the New Natural Resource. You'll want to check out the lineup of speakers and keynoters and be sure to be a part of that. So thank you again today to IDA Ireland for sponsoring our session, to David for your time and insights, and of course to all of our viewers for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooks.